Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Juice. Today, we are opening up our liquid passport and we're flying across the pond over to a very amazing, wide open space, Australia. We're going to the very west part and we're going to Western Australia. We're headed to Margaret River to meet somebody very special. The senior winemaker at Xanadu. We have got Glenn Goodall with us. Glenn, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Angela, great to be here. It's awesome.
I know it's 7 a.m. in Australia and it's 6 p.m. here in Toronto. So I know we've got our wine clocks a little off today, but I'm looking forward to learning all about your region. I know you're probably just headed into harvest right now, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. We're about 2 weeks away from our first pick, but the nets are on. The weather's been glorious. It's been an absolutely fantastic summer. Like today, we're expecting 30 degrees C, so that's about 85, 86 Fahrenheit. So yeah, no, it's a really lovely lead up to harvest. So we'll be flat out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you've had a lot of amazing vintages too. You've been around the world. You've been to Bordeaux. You've had, I mean, according to your bio, you've done, I think, 30 different harvests. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably more than that now, probably 35, 36, although 21 of them are right here at Xanadu and Margaret River.
Nice.
But, you know, before kids, you had the opportunity to, do a couple of vintages a year, and it was always good. But it's amazing after having done that for such a long time and then coming to Margaret River and putting things into perspective where, what a 10 out of 10 vintages in other parts of the world are, 7s and 8s in Margaret River. We've just been so blessed with so many good vintages in a row down here.
Yeah, and coming out of 2020, I mean, Australia is a very big place. I feel like everyone always thinks of Australia like this small little island or something, but it's massive. I mean, it's huge. It's like Canada. I mean, it takes us hours to fly from Ontario to BC, and it's very expensive. And Australia is the exact same way because your wine region is it's a hidden gem in Australia, isn't it? What brought you to that area? Are you from that area?
My wife's born and bred down here. I cut my teeth on the East Coast, and my wife is also a winemaker. Nice. It was a small town over east, so coming home to Western Australia was great for both of us because it's just such a great place next to the coast. I really love that anything to do with the ocean, but also a wine industry making premium wine that can sustain 2 winemaking careers. So yeah, it was really lovely to have moved here back in 1997, 98, I think it was. So yeah, and the place has certainly grown since then.
Yeah, seriously. So tell me a little bit about Xanadu. I know it's a bit of it's not a mystery to me because I was just saying earlier that there is actually a winemaker here in Canada that cut his teeth over at Xanadu and is now making premium wines over here. And so, the Xanadu love is still over here in Ontario. But tell me about the winery, the philosophy, your philosophy behind the wines. I'd really love to learn a little bit more about sort of what that means to you.
Yeah, no worries. Well, the Xanadu was founded by an Irish doctor, Dr. John Lagan. First vines were planted in 1977. The name Xanadu came from one of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poems, Kubla Khan, where Xanadu was his summer paradise, his summer palace in paradise. So, like, it's kind of a quirky name. I was sort of growing up with it. When I first started here, it was called Chateau Xanadu. So that's got even less of a ring to it. But we're very blessed. Xanadu's been around now for over 40 years, and the Margaret River wine industry itself has really only been going for just more than 50 years. So the whole region's achieved a huge amount in a really short space of time. But that, the main driver behind that is just the pristine environment that we are. We're very isolated down here. We're, as you said previously, we're a destination. We're not really on the way to anywhere, but we've got some amazing soils and amazing maritime climate. We're surrounded, it's a little peninsula, I guess, the Capes region. So we've got the ocean on 3 sides. So while we've still got lovely warmth and sunshine, we've got this lovely cooling breeze that happens every afternoon. So from that perspective, it's a great place to grow grapes and as well as, just to visit and to surf and to have a look at the amazing environment that we've got here. As far as my philosophy goes, like particularly with any of the varieties, I want this region and these vineyards to be the loudest voice in the glass, not necessarily my influence, but have the fingerprint of the vineyards really shining and really coming through in the wine, so that when you open up a bottle of Margaret River anything, you've got the opportunity to have a Margaret River in a glass, rather than my personal, well, that is my philosophy, but hopefully it rings louder for the region and the vineyards than it does for individual winemaking style, and yeah, and that's the key to what we do here at Xanadu.
Yeah, and you've got some amazing Chardonnay and Cabernet. So you have this sort of warmth, which is what all the grapes need. Then you have this coastal influence, which to me, I would assume elongates the growing season. It gives freshness and acidity to the wines. It gives this crispness and loveliness. I mean, would you agree to that, or what would you say? You know, if you were to compare Margaret River wines, Xanadu wines in particular, with another region, is there somewhere else you would compare them with, or are they kind of a standalone little place?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question, because Margaret River is probably one of the only regions in the world that was identified as having amazing potential for growing grapes before any commercial vines were even planted. So back in the day, in the late 60s, Dr. John Gladstone, who was a WA agronomist, advised the West Australian government that, after looking at a lot of climate and soil data, recognised that there was a lot of similarities between Margaret River and Bordeaux. We're a little bit warmer and we get more sunshine hours than Bordeaux, but so that was the genesis of commercial plantings in Margaret River, which happened in 1967 at Bas Felix. But it was Bordeaux varieties that were planted here. So a lot of the older vineyards around Margaret River region are actually Cabernet or Bordeaux-based varieties. But it's just got this amazing affinity for Chardonnay as well. It's quite funny. I had an American journalist once ask me, it's like, you know, if Margaret River is been so well recognised for Cabernet, then why does Chardonnay grow so well here? And my response to that is, have you ever tried a bad Chardonnay from Bordeaux? No, clearly, because they don't grow it there. But it probably would go. Maybe it'll go quite well. I don't know. But on top of that, we're blessed with the climate. We're blessed with some clonal advantages that some of the clones that we use down here, the Gin clone of Chardonnay and the Horton clone of Cabernet, which are quite unique to this part of the world. And I think that rings true with the Margaret River style. But I think, you know, these old soils and the Indian Ocean, you know, we've got this air conditioner that arcs up at about 11 a.m. every morning and keeps everything cool. Great. So while we've still got that lovely ripening warmth and sunshine hours, that sea breeze that comes in keeps things really cool. And so the Cabernets in particular, in that later part of the season, still retain that freshness and that lovely vibrancy.
I found that in tasting them. I know we've got 2 to taste, including one of the Chardonnays today, and there's 4 that are available currently in our market, I think across Canada, and available widely in the LCBO. But the Chardonnays I found, you know, really, really interesting, and the Cabernets, the freshness just popped right out to me, and I really love that part about it, because to me, when you have a Cabernet, one of the most distinguished Cabernets, that freshness is really what gives it that lovability for me. And I think that's really, when you're not surfing the waves, you're obviously a surfer, you're surfing the vines. And I know, how big is the estate? Like how much, you know, what's the hectares or acres of vineyards in the winery today?
So we've got 85 hectares here on 2 properties, being or 3 properties really, the Lagan Estate, our Budget Up Vineyard, and Stevens Road. Where the location of those vineyards is central Margaret River, so in the Wallcliffe sub-region. We're only about 5 to 6 kilometres away from the township of Margaret River itself, to the east of us, and then about 5 or 6 kilometres to the ocean, to the west of us. And that's supplemented with some fruit. We're about 50% of our crush is estate grown, and 50% of our crush is from long-term growers that we have around the region. The region itself's quite a big region. So north-south, it's about 100 kilometres north-south, from Cape Naturalist in the north to Cape Lewin in the south. So the Geograph and Indian Ocean, and then the Southern Ocean in the south. And around about 30 k's east-west, depending on how, you know, the variation in the coast. So it's quite a big region.
And the vines. So say on the Chardonnay that we have open right now, and we're gonna taste through. I mean, how old are the Chardonnays? Yes, you were talking about the clones, and I thought the Gin clone was so interesting. I mean, a lot of the times you talk about clones can get talking about wine in general can be boring, but clones are very interesting because people need to really understand that there's so much difference. You know, not only is there difference in wines and regions, but then you have the complete difference of a clone in an area. And so, you know, you have to pick different clones that are sort of suited for different climates and terroirs. And what's the terroir like within, you know, I can really taste terroir in the Chardonnay from Xanadu. Can you tell me a little bit about the terroir?
Yeah, well, a lot of our wines from the estate are single vineyard. Like we've got our Stevens Road, the premium black label there. Predominantly that's coming from Stevens Road and our Lagan estate. And so there's quite a bit of a mosaic of soil types in the Margaret River region. But a lot of the best soils are on these sort of gravelly laterite, ironstone, free draining, gravelly loam sort of soils. Combined with that beautiful cooling sea breeze. And so they're generally relatively low vigor vines. And low cropping too, particularly in the case of the Gingin clone. And one of the hallmarks of that Gingin clone Chardonnay, you should say a little bit about the origin of that first, because it's kind of a kooky name, Gingin. Gingin's actually
a kooky name. I love it.
It is. Gingin's actually a small town north of Perth. So what actually happened was in the 50s, an American researcher, Professor Harold Olmo from UC Davis, bought some cuttings in 1957 and planted them in the Swan Valley. And it was this clone, which is well known for its hen and chicken or millerandage, where you have big and small berries on the same bunch. So like peppercorn and pea size. And it was a indicator for leaf roll virus. As it turns out, back in the day, that wasn't so great because these little bunches didn't produce the yield. It was all about yield, but they produced this amazing intensity of flavor. So the cuttings from that original planting were taken and propagated and planted in one of the Horton vineyards up in Gingin, the Valencia vineyard. And since then, after the genesis of Margaret River being bought over varieties, some Chardonnay was planted, and those cuttings came from Gingin. And being everything in Western Australia, it just gets shortened and slanged, and it just became known as the Gingin clone, which was the predominant clone planted in this area. But a result of those really small bunches, and some years at the Lagan estate in particular, they're freak bunches. They're like bonsai 60-gram bunches. So they're very small, which results in low yields, but amazing intensity, beautiful retention of acidity, and an enormous amount of generosity of fruit and power. So yeah,
I love that. Gingin. So it's a clone that's very indigenous to the area that you're in. Like it's not a clone that's grown anywhere else.
No, for a long time we thought that it was the same as Mendoza clone Chardonnay, but it's been a mystery that's been unfolding, and the West Australian Ag Department is sort of trying to piece together the origins of it. So that their origin coming through from UC Davis is, I guess, as close as we've got to the true origin of this Gingin clone. But it's also that clone, over propagation and 50 years or 40 years of growth down here, it's really adapted to this climate and evolved to be what it is down here in Margaret River. And we've got some extremely strict quarantine laws in Western Australia, and there's always new clones coming in, but I keep going back to the well of the Gingin clone when it comes to planting vineyards and sourcing fruit, just because of the even at relatively low sugars at harvest, it's always got this amazing power and intensity, which for me is really important because all of our Chardonnays are wild fermented. And so being wild fermented with indigenous yeast, you don't want to pick things too ripe and have too high alcohol, whereby, there's a bit of risk involved with wild ferment. With higher alcohols, it's you've got potential problems with stuck fermentation. But when you're picking relatively low sugars, it's great to have wines that only 12.5, 13% alcohol, but still have oodles of oomph and that lovely white flesh, stone fruit, grapefruit. One of the things that you do get some of that sort of grapefruity pithiness with a Gingin clone, and I guess that's because with those tiny little berries, there's a little bit more skin to juice ratio, so it gives it this lovely backbone, of structure. It's like having like an al dente kind of structure where you've got this core of acidity and grapefruity phenolics, and then all these lovely puffy marshmallowy kind of textural elements from leaf stirring on the outside. I think with plenty of generosity, I don't feel the need to put any of our Chardonnays through malolactic fermentation. So there's no MLF. Again, I see that more as a winery influence rather than a vineyard influence. So I really want the vineyard to shine and the clone to shine. Geez,
I love that.
7 a.m.
Cheers to 7 a.m. I know. Brushing your teeth with Chardonnay, there could be worse ways to start a day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the elegance. The elegance on these Chardonnays, I feel like really comes through again. Once the elegance in the red wines too, I felt like elegance is a word from this region that I just I'd love to apply to it. And I think I love the idea of the wild ferment. I think that's something, and the no mallow, very interesting too. So you have this nice big backbone of acidity, but you have this creaminess and texture from obviously leaf stirring. And I mean, you didn't go into any barrel talk here. Is there any barrels on the the two Chardonnays we have in the market here, the DJL and the
Yep.
Exmoor? What's the barrel regime for these wines?
It's a little bit similar. Well, it depends on which tier you're looking at. With everything's wild fermented in barrel. It's predominantly old oak in the Exmoor range.
Barrel, yeah.
The DJL is about 20-25%, and the black label premium that we're trying here is 25%.
Nice.
So it's all French oak. But what I like to do because it's all wild ferment, you know, every single barrel is like an individual prospect.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're great, but it's like you can't just, especially during ferment, you're looking at all these barrels and you're assessing them all. You can't just you can't generalize about a whole batch. It's like going into a hospital ward and going, right, all you guys have got a cold. You know, every bed has got to be looked at and taken on its merit. So when we select barrels, it's all French oak. They're all barriques, so they're 225 litres. I think that those small barrel formats are well framed. You know, they frame the intensity of ginger and clone Chardonnay well. But I only buy two kinds of barrels, and I sort of sum it up as black barrels and white barrels. So the black barrels to me are generally high toast, big personality, powerful barrels, and the white barrels are generally quite blonde in toast, water bent, much more fragrant and floral, and a little bit less oak impact. I probably buy twice as much of those more subtle barrels than I do the big impact barrels. And the reason behind that is because Chardonnay stays in barrel for 9 months individually. When you put the blends together, rather than trying to find one barrel that suits every kind of vineyard, I like doing that, because then when you're putting the blends together, if you've got black and white, you can have any shade of gray that you want. You know, you can select the barrels so that they're perfectly matched to the power and the intensity of the vineyards. And so I think the oak frames the fruit really nicely. But again, I keep coming back to that thing. Wanting the vineyard to be the loudest voice in the glass is really the key with these. And you mentioned batonnage. That's something we do a fair bit of batonnage, so that textural creaminess, yogurty, nougat kind of character is, because they're naturally high acid with the ginger and clone. That is a nice foil to that acidity, rather than having to lower the acidity through MLF. And I try and avoid those really overtly buttery diacetyl kind of wines. I see that more of a secondary character.
I love that, the black and white barrels. That's interesting. I've never heard anyone describe their sort of the barrel regime as, you know, going sort of black or white like a chessboard. It sounds very interesting to me, and I love the use of this sort of going back and forth, because you're right. Every single barrel, particularly the wild ferment, can, you know, go at a different range. Then you have different, you know, different terroirs or different wines, and so everything is unique about blending when it comes to this. And then you do have the single vineyard wines, which just, you know, express themselves so beautifully in the glass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you do, with time, you start to recognize what types of barrel work best with specific vineyards, and those vineyards that have got plenty of power and intensity, you know, appreciate a little bit more of those bigger personality barrels, or more to the point, can cope with it and match it well. And then some of the more subtle vineyards, or sometimes in the Exmoor range, we do use some of the Dijon clones as well. They're like 95 and 96. They're a little bit have less intensity than the ginger, and so they sort of tend to get more of those sort of more fragrant, subtle water bent barrels, or older oak. You know, the old oak's still very important to us as well. In fact, some of our best barrels are always the second fill. So they've already just had 1 year of seasoning, and then that second year round, all those edges are taken off it. And they're probably the most valuable barrels that we have in circulation every year.
Oh, that's I mean, that's an amazing Chardonnay story. And I feel like, what's the, like, I know obviously seafood is really big over in Australia. Is there any sort of particular food that you would pair with the Chardonnay from Xanadu?
It would be a local critter called a marin. So it's like a freshwater crayfish, black. And if you're on private property, you can fish for them anywhere, any time of the year, but usually there's only a month season where you recreational fishing, you can go and get them, and it's on the first new moon in February, and you go down
like
and
right now.
Yeah, like it's marin season right now, and you go down and you snare them. Back in the day when I was a lot faster than my son, he's as he got older, he's faster. And I just, when there's a horse in there, I hand him the snare and say, right, she's all yours. He's got much quicker reflexes than me, but they're just so lovely when you get a swag and marin. But to be honest, any sort of crustacean like crayfish, something like that. Even last weekend, went down just down to a local beach at Kilcarnup and got a feed of abalone. And yeah, it was lovely. Just come home with 20 odd abalone, shuck them, give them a bash, cook them up, and sit out on deck and share a bottle of Chardonnay with friends. It's pretty hard to beat.
Nice abalone. My first time having abalone was in Sicily on New Year's when we went into this restaurant and we had abalone. And never even had abalone before, and I was like, "What the heck is an abalone?" So I got an abalone lesson on an island. It was great. But
no, it's awesome. There's something really nice about when you can go out there and catch or forage and grab your own food. It's like when you're camping, like you can have macaroni cheese at home and it's but when you're out camping and you have macaroni cheese, it's like, woo, sound the bells, this is awesome.
Also, another great pairing with Chardonnay, like mac and cheese. Like, why not, right?
Absolutely. Well, I'm having it with Vegemite on toast at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, classic Aussie breakfast. There we go. That's amazing. And I know. So you obviously you make Chardonnay and Cabernet. And what is the how much of each do you produce?
They're by far our two biggest products that we produce. We probably all up do about 12,000 dozen Chardonnay, and probably that's across that's through all of our tiers. Like our single vineyards, our Lagans, we're only doing Lagans 300 or 400 dozen, and Stevens Road's only 250 dozen. So we're literally only selecting the 10 best barrels from not just the best vineyard, but the best part of the vineyard. Like the most important thing is just walking a lot of rows to identify the best parts of the vineyards. And a Cabernet a little bit more than that, maybe about 15,000 dozen. But again, Stevens Road, which I'm not sure if you have it in Canada, that's probably our Grand Cru. Lagan and Stevens Road are our Grand Cru vineyards. That's only 21 rows. We're only making anything between 5 and 10 barrels a year from that particular site. Our reserve wine, we produce anything between 250 and 400 dozen. Like with our climate, we've been able to produce a reserve wine every year since 2008. But I think the term reserve gets bandied around a little bit too much by some people. So like in a couple of years with the Cabernet, even though they were good years, when you've set the bar yourself reasonably high, like our 14 was fantastic. So in 15 and 16, I decided that it just wasn't, it was some bloody good Cabernet, but not quite at the same level. So we didn't produce reserves in that year. But the beneficiary of that is the next tier down, which gets allocated that fruit which would have otherwise gone to reserve, and that certainly paid dividends at that level.
Yes, well, I know as we open up the Cabernet here, you've got the black label too, the black label Cab, right? Yes, the award winning. Oh
yes. No, yes it is. So that's
you're both award winning, both of you. You both have won the award.
Oh, well, it's more than just both of us. It's winemaking is absolutely a team sport. There's a lot more than just. There's I got to absolutely pay credit to our growers, our viticulturists, and the whole team here in the winery. It really is a team sport, and just for people past and present who've been involved. But this Black Label 2016, this was one of those years where I decided not to make a reserve, which raised a few eyebrows in the accounts department and the Brains Trust, but it certainly paid dividends because all of that great fruit cascaded into this wine. And so when you say award winner, the award that this wine won among many was the Jimmy Watson Trophy. So the Jimmy Watson Trophy is the most significant trophy in Australia. It's the trophy for the best young red wine, and it's awarded at the Melbourne Wine Show. But it's pretty well the only trophy that gets talked about on the 6 o'clock news. Like the Xanadu Cabernet's won 8, consecutive Cabernet trophies at the national show, but
Wow.
this one, the Jimmy Watson Award made a lot more noise than that, even though that sort of pedigree is probably far more significant. But yeah, so the cab here, as you mentioned earlier, freshness for me is a real key. And if you can ever really want to have a smell Margaret River, this just smells like home to me.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Yeah, I want you to describe the nose to me. What's the nose on that smell like?
It's a bit obscure, but it's just Margaret River. I just smell Margaret River. It's just that blackcurrant cassis, sort of bay leaf, sort of those sort of. There's freshness but there's sort of dry Mediterranean herbs. So that sort of that bay leaf and sage, and but in particular that black satsuma plum, classic cassis kind of characteristics. Again, there's oak there that's just framing the fruit. Oak isn't the loudest voice there. By all means, it's fruits that's absolutely driving that wine. That's about 40% new oak, but I think that again it goes through to the sort of metaphor that power and elegance don't need to be mutually exclusive. You can have that power from which is inherent in our, again, a unique clone of Cabernet, the Horton Clone, but you still got this lovely elegance and prettiness about the wine. So a lot of the wine, they're not bombastic. They're not stand a fork in it kind of wine. They've still got some prettiness, but they've got this latent power underneath.
Yeah, the elegance and there's tannins there that are super strong, but they don't like hit you in the face. They're elegant, and they're very soft and subtle, but they are there, like they are ready to be shown, but they're not aggressive in any way, shape, or form. And I love this wine too. I definitely feel like the freshness comes through on the nose. Like you're smelling those sort of deep berry characteristics, but then there's this sort of light violet too. Like you're getting this florality on the nose that kind of gives it this very interesting and complex aroma. And the 2016, I mean, I didn't realize that this was sort of reserve fruit that kind of got passed down, because this wine is just, it overperforms for the price that we get it for here. And it's a dynamite vintage. Like it's really delicious.
Yeah, no, it's great. This brand, this Black Label Cabernet, actually won the Overachiever Award by Langton's. Langton's being the auction house for wine in Australia. So because the 2017 went on to win the national show, and so did the 18 won the Halliday Cabernet Challenge, and so yeah, no, it's got a lovely sort of pedigree there through there. But I really I like your point about the florals, and that I should probably add a lot of that is often from. I'll often use Malbec and Petit Verdot in the blend as well. So this, while it's labelled as Cabernet, there's 5% Malbec and 3% PV Petit Verdot, which has often got this lovely sort of floral potpourri kind of rose petal violet kind of characteristic, and as well as big tannins and sort of muscular kind of wines. You don't need a lot of PV to have an influence on the Cabernet, but it's appreciate those comments, because it's something that we really hang our hat on with Cabernet, and even though as much as I love Chardonnay, it seems as though Cabernet is the yardstick by which people remember vintages, like 5, 10, 15 years down the track. Oh, that was a great vintage. And I guess it's because people tend to hold on to their Cabernets a bit longer.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. I guess the Chardonnays end up getting drunk a little quicker, and the Cabs end up going maybe into a corner, into some sort of a wine rack. I feel like too, like in this day and age, it's so nice to have a winery that actually, like, this is a 2016 and it's drinking amazingly well. Like obviously you could keep this wine for another 5 to 10 years, but also you have a 4-year-old wine. And so you don't have to actually, it's not 2018 or 2019. You're drinking a wine that's already, now 5 years old. We're in 2021. And so you have this, you've already, as the winery, has already done the work of aging it for you and releasing it at a time when it's already a little bit older. You can keep it, but you don't have to. It's a really nice time to drink it right now.
Yeah, it's lovely to see a wine with a little bit of age on it, because it just sort of it starts to hit its straps. Most people, when they age wines on the way home in the car from the bottle shop. So yeah, it's lovely when you see the fruit, the oak, and everything, all that maturation just coming together and hitting its straps. And from a tannin perspective, that's something that with all of our Cabernets, like the tannins are vineyard derived. Walking a lot of rows and picking them on the right day is so important for me. So I don't add any tannins. I don't do any fining. It's literally just walk rows, get it right in the vineyard. And if you want a little bit more extraction, well, you can do that by managing the cap when you're fermenting. If you want to get a bit more tannins, pump it over a little bit more. I tend to manage a couple of ways. Like I'll tend to, most of the wine will pump over a couple of times or punch down a couple of times or 3 or 4 times a day. And then press it relatively early while there's still maybe 2 or 3 bommet of sugar there. And that retains lots of primary fruit and freshness and for lack of a better word, a bit of simplicity, just that primary element. And then maybe a third of the blend will get extended maceration. So it's on skins for about a month. And that comes to a lot more complex, more plush, condensed tannins, because the tannins polymerize and they get a lot more sort of supple. And so that you've got this, a bit like the oak, the black and the white, you've got this sort of vibrant primary fruit character, and then you've got this more complex, plush, savory sort of batches. And in the vineyard specific, which ones you use for that. And again, so when you're putting the blends together, you've got some extremes to try and put blends together, rather than making everything, grays bang down the middle. You've got scope to blend. And I quite often I'll put 4 or 5% of a younger vintage in just to freshen things up as well.
Yeah, so we've tried some different vintages, but for the last, I know we were talking earlier too about the vintage of 2020 and the differences between 2021. I mean, can you give us some interesting, what's the Margaret River vintages report look like for the next 3 years, or the last 3 years coming into this vintage?
Well, 19 was 19. Well, one of the litmus tests for us is how the marri trees are going, to be perfectly honest. So marri red gums, so they're eucalyptus trees, and when they flower, generally it bodes well for the harvest, because the flowering is the native food source for little silver-eyed birds, and they are a damn pest. They hassle our grapes all the time. So if you've got a massive flowering season, as we did in 2020, the birds are distracted. They're up in the trees, feeding on the marri blossom, not hassling your grapes. Whereas in 2019, there was no marri blossom. So it was, as well as being a late cool season, there was birds of Alfred Hitchcock proportion. So we're all netted. All of our vineyards are netted, but it's still a lot of work keeping the birds out. This year, the blossom's just starting to come out now.
It's a little late.
But we probably won't be harvesting for another 2 weeks. So it's hopefully if it's a staggered blossom, that it keeps the birds busy for the whole season. But last year was probably one of the most challenging vintages. Not for anything that the weather threw up, but it's just for having a pandemic in the middle of the season. And that was just weird, as it was everywhere around the world, and having people
hopefully never happen again,
oh my
goodness.
Having staff coming to you in tears saying, I need to go back to France, I have to go and see my parents, and and so that the flip side of that now this year is looking really good, but we potentially will have some labor shortages because there's not the amount of backpackers around that we usually have for a lot of the hand picking this year, so we really need to prioritize our hand picks. But as far as the season and the weather going, it's shaping up to be an absolute cracker. Touch wood.
That's exciting. Well, I know you're kind of ramping up into everything that's sort of fast and furious right now for the 2021 season, and hopefully, I know I've been talking to everybody sort of around the world when it comes to harvesting. I think everyone's a bit like, oh my goodness, hopefully this vintage is never repeated ever again. And the 2020 will be a vintage to remember. We should all have wine from 2020 just to remember what happened in each one of these regions. It's wild. I think you were saying everybody in hospitality was working in the vineyards, and like what a great way to kind of like pull together as a family and make sure that things still get done.
Yeah, just as COVID hit around the world, we, as like everywhere else, we had to shut down our restaurant. Employed all of our hospitality staff, and they went out in the vineyards and started picking grapes. So keeping everyone busy, and it's in tough times, people pull together, and it's really that's what I said prior. It's a team sport. Everyone, you can't do it without having a great team. And looking forward to hopefully not quite as stressful vintage this year from a staffing perspective, but yeah, no, it's always a great time of the year when that vintage sort of camaraderie, when everybody comes together, and yeah, it's just there's a good vibe around the whole town during harvest, being a tourist town and a wine town.
Well, that's so great. And the very last question, I know, you've got some hobbies, but when you're not actually maybe drinking beer, making wine and surfing, and I guess hanging out with your kids, there's not much time left, but are there things that you're doing as a winemaker in your off time as a hobby that you can share with us?
Yeah, sort of, my wife and I, we've got our own little brand on the side called La Cookie, and just doing some quirky things that I wouldn't otherwise do in a bigger brand like Xanadu. So yeah, sort of offbeat sort of things. But it's just nice. It's a wine community, so hanging out with other winemakers and just having a look at what other people are doing, and constantly sort of challenging yourself and benchmarking your wines with wines from around the world, and people just pushing the boundaries with different techniques and so on. So I think it's important not to get complacent and just rest on your laurels and keep doing the same thing. I think it's important to keep evolving and to keep keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening around the world, and often under your nose in your own backyard, and your people are trying different things all the time, which is awesome, and it keeps it fresh.
Yeah, and this movement of natural winemaking and this sort of conversation around wine right now, the whole industry is evolving in many different ways. So you do have to, be an intuitive winemaker as you are, and stick with the times and evolve and change. And it's such a fun world to stay abreast to, because each and every vintage there's something new to learn, something new that you can try, and a new wine for you to taste.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we're also in the process of planting new vineyards here. Which is I'm really excited about them coming on stream, and yeah, just keeping on top of things. We're obviously looking at maintaining our own environmental credentials here. We're Sustainable Wine Growing Australia certified, and we'll get those on some labels going forward as well. Yeah. But look, Margaret River is a pretty easy place to live when you can wake up, go for a surf before work, then come into work. Make a bit of wine, go home, and then go fishing in the afternoon. Yeah, it's a really beautiful part of the world.
Us Canadians love to hear that. I think Australia is a sister country for us. I feel like you go there, it's like there's the Canadians in a different way, where there's sun all the time. Except when you're down in Melbourne, obviously, in some of the cooler areas. But I'm sure you'll be seeing some Canadians when travel kind of lifts its ban and we are able to open up our regular passport. But thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we can get down and help you with some harvest, and look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. Thank you for taking this time to chat with us, Glenn.
No worries, Angela. Welcome. I look forward to hosting you down here.
Awesome. Cheers, mate.
See you later. See you, everyone.